Max Chen had always been proud of his ability to explain complex chemical reactions to his classmates, but now he wished he'd spent more time learning to read subway maps. The 13-year-old adjusted his thick-rimmed glasses and stared at the strange symbols that had replaced the familiar letters and numbers on the train's digital display. They definitely weren't Chinese characters, despite his grandmother's insistence that he learn them, and they certainly weren't the standard MTA font he'd memorized during his countless trips to science competitions. The subway car lurched, and Max grabbed the nearest pole, his backpack full of chemistry textbooks swinging wildly. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting strange shadows across the empty car. Empty. That should have been his first clue that something was wrong. New York subway cars were never empty at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. The train dove deeper underground, far deeper than any subway line should go. Max's ears popped, and the air grew noticeably warmer. The rational part of his brain, the part that could recite the periodic table backwards while solving differential equations, tried to calculate their approximate depth based on the pressure change. The less rational part was too busy panicking to care. When the train finally stopped, the doors opened with a hiss that sounded more like a reptilian breath than mechanical hydraulics. Max stepped out into what should have been the 42nd Street station, but instead found himself in a vast, crystal-domed terminal. Beings of all shapes, sizes, and states of matter glided, slithered, or floated past him. Some appeared to be breaking several laws of physics just by existing. "Oh," Max whispered, clutching his backpack straps. "This is definitely not Times Square." A holographic sign overhead shifted through various alien scripts before settling on English. "Welcome to Grand Central Nexus, Earth Terminal. Unofficial. Please proceed with caution. Humans may spontaneously panic." Max didn't panic. Instead, he did what he always did when confronted with new information. He observed, analyzed, and took notes. He pulled out his worn notebook, the one with chemical formulas scribbled in the margins, and began sketching the impossible architecture and otherworldly beings around him. That's when he noticed the lone figure at what appeared to be a coffee shop, if coffee shops normally had anti-gravity cups and servers with multiple temporal phases. The figure was tall, covered in iridescent scales that seemed to absorb and reflect light in ways that defied optics, and was staring intently at a steaming cup with obvious disappointment. Max's mother had always taught him to help others, and his father had instilled in him a deep curiosity about the unknown. Unfortunately, neither had ever covered proper etiquette for approaching a clearly distressed dragon in an interdimensional transit hub. "Excuse me," Max said, approaching the figure with the cautious precision of someone who had spent too much time handling volatile chemicals. "But I couldn't help noticing you seemed troubled by your beverage." The dragon turned, revealing eyes that glowed like distant supernovae and teeth that could probably shred battleships. Its scales shifted color slightly, creating patterns that made Max's head hurt if he looked too long. "This establishment," the dragon rumbled in a voice that seemed to vibrate at exactly the resonant frequency of Max's skeleton, "claims to serve the finest caffeinated beverages in 17 dimensions. Yet they cannot properly balance the ionic composition of a simple morning brew." Max peered at the cup, his scientific curiosity temporarily overriding his survival instinct. The liquid inside was a swirling vortex of dark matter and what appeared to be actual starlight. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the cup. The dragon's eye ridges rose slightly, but it nodded. Max pulled out his pocket spectrometer, a birthday gift from his aunt, and analyzed the drink's composition. Years of chemistry experiments and cooking with his grandmother had taught him about balance, about how tiny adjustments could transform disasters into masterpieces. "The problem," Max said, slipping into what his friends called his lecture mode, "is that you're missing a catalyst to bind the temporal particles with the base solution. On Earth, we use something simple for that." He reached into his backpack and pulled out a small container of his grandmother's special Himalayan pink salt. The dragon watched with increasing interest as Max carefully added 3 precisely measured grains of salt to the cosmic brew. The liquid swirled, shifted through several impossible colors, and settled into a perfect spiral galaxy in a cup. "There," Max said proudly. "The sodium ions should help stabilize the quantum fluctuations while enhancing the flavor profile. My grandmother always says salt is the bridge between dimensions in cooking, though I don't think she meant it quite so literally." The dragon lifted the cup with surprising delicacy, considering its claws were roughly the size of Max's forearm. It took a sip, and for a moment, every light in the terminal dimmed. Then the dragon's eyes widened, and a sound like a purring thunderstorm emerged from its chest. "Remarkable," it said. "You've achieved in seconds what our finest molecular gastromancers have failed to accomplish in eons. Tell me, young human, what is your name?" "Max Chen," he replied, pushing his glasses up his nose. "And I really should be getting back to my chemistry test, which I'm probably already late for." "Chemistry test?" The dragon's laugh shook dust from the crystal dome above. "My dear boy, I believe you've just passed a far more important examination. You see, I am not merely a dissatisfied customer. I am Vorax the Infinite, Emperor of the Draconic Hegemony and current chair of the Galactic Council's Committee on Cultural Integration. And you, Max Chen, have just solved a diplomatic crisis that has been brewing for longer than your species has had written language." Max blinked. "I have. Indeed. This establishment serves as neutral ground for interspecies negotiations, and its inability to properly serve all delegations has caused numerous incidents. Your simple solution may have just prevented several wars. Though," the dragon added with a toothy grin, "I suspect your real challenges are about to begin." That's when Max noticed the crowd that had gathered around them. Beings of all descriptions were whispering, pointing, and in some cases emitting pheromones of astonishment. He also noticed that his pocket spectrometer was now displaying readings in what appeared to be Elder Draconic script. Max said, watching as his simple act of helping with a beverage rapidly spiraled into what appeared to be a major diplomatic incident. "I don't suppose there's any chance I could still make it back for my chemistry test." The Emperor's laugh echoed through the terminal once again. "My dear boy, I believe you're about to get a rather different kind of education." The Emperor's private chamber aboard the diplomatic vessel Star's Twilight was exactly as intimidating as Max had expected, though the chemistry lab setup in the corner was a surprise. The walls were lined with what appeared to be living metal, shifting and rippling like scales in the light of 3 artificial suns. Holographic displays showed real-time footage of various planetary systems, and what looked suspiciously like a supernova in progress. Max sat in a chair that adjusted itself to his human physiology, trying not to fidget as Emperor Vorax loomed over a collection of containers that would make any Earth laboratory jealous. Various ambassadors and officials had crowded into the chamber, each representing a different species and civilization. Some were clearly hostile to the idea of a human child being present, while others watched with undisguised curiosity. "Yum, Max," Vorax rumbled, his massive form casting shadows that seemed to move independently of the light sources. "Your solution to our beverage crisis was intriguing. But I wonder if it was mere luck, or if there's more to humanity's understanding of molecular gastronomy than our reports suggest." Max straightened his glasses, a habit that surfaced whenever he was about to face a scientific challenge. "Sir, I mean, Your Imperial Majesty, on Earth we have a saying. Cooking is art, but baking is chemistry. My grandmother taught me both." A being that appeared to be made entirely of crystalline geometries shifted forward. "The Emperor's time is not to be wasted with primitive Earth idioms." "Let him speak," Vorax interrupted, his tail creating a sound like wind through ancient caves. "Continue, Max Chen of Earth." Max took a deep breath. "Well, you see, every culture on Earth has its own way of combining flavors and elements. My grandmother says that's because food isn't just about nutrition. It's about bringing people together, understanding each other. When you know why certain molecules interact the way they do, you can create something new that everyone can appreciate." The Emperor's eyes glowed with increased intensity. An interesting theory. Perhaps we should put it to the test. He gestured to the laboratory setup. Before you are ingredients from 17 different star systems. Some are considered delicacies, others are classified as diplomatic hazards. Your challenge is to create something that all species present can safely consume and enjoy. Max approached the lab station, his scientific mind already cataloging the strange assortment before him. There were liquids that defied gravity, crystals that hummed in harmonic frequencies, and powders that changed color based on who was looking at them. His pocket spectrometer, now seemingly upgraded by whatever force had changed its display, provided readings that would make his chemistry teacher either ecstatic or terrified. First, Max said, falling into his familiar role of laboratory work, we need to establish a base that's stable across multiple dimensional phases. He reached for a container of what appeared to be liquid starlight. This has a molecular structure similar to water, but it exists in 5 states simultaneously. If we can stabilize it. For the next hour, Max worked with the precision of a seasoned chef and the methodology of a scientist. He combined elements that shouldn't logically coexist, using principles he'd learned in his grandmother's kitchen and his father's garage. When certain compounds proved too volatile, he found Earth-inspired solutions, a pinch of ordinary sugar to bind temporal particles, a dash of citric acid to neutralize dimensional instabilities. The assembled dignitaries watched with expressions ranging from skepticism to amazement as Max created something entirely new. The final result was a gently swirling sphere that hovered above its container, emitting a soft light that somehow managed to look appetizing to every species present. The outer layer adapts to each consumer's biochemistry, Max explained, trying to keep the excitement from his voice. I used the principle of quantum entanglement to ensure that each person experiences their own ideal version of the taste and texture. The base ingredients provide a universal nutritional value, while the adaptive elements create a unique experience for each individual. Emperor Vorax was the first to try it. The sphere responded to his touch, transforming into what looked like liquid fire before disappearing into his massive maw. The dragon's eyes widened, then closed in what appeared to be genuine pleasure. Remarkable, he said softly. It tastes like the first light of creation, with notes of stellar fusion and a hint of, what is that? Vanilla, Max said. Sometimes the simplest things make the biggest difference. One by one, the other diplomats sampled Max's creation, the crystalline being hummed in harmonious frequencies it hadn't generated before. A cloud of sentient gas changed colors in what Max hoped was appreciation. Even a being that existed primarily in theoretical space managed to consume and enjoy the substance. You've done more than create a meal, young human, Vorax said, his voice carrying an unusual warmth. You've demonstrated something our finest minds often forget, that true innovation comes not from complexity, but from understanding the fundamental connections between all things. Max adjusted his glasses again. My grandmother says that's why she never writes down her recipes. She says cooking is about feeling the connections between ingredients, just like chemistry is about understanding the connections between elements. Your grandmother, the Emperor rumbled thoughtfully, sounds like a wise being. Perhaps there is more wisdom to be found on Earth than we previously believed. He turned to address the assembled diplomats. What we have witnessed here is not merely culinary skill or scientific knowledge, but a demonstration of humanity's unique ability to bridge differences and find common ground. A murmur of agreement rippled through the chamber. Even the previously skeptical officials seemed impressed. Max noticed that several of them were taking notes, possibly already planning how to incorporate Earth-style innovation into their own methodologies. However, Vorax continued, his expression growing more serious. This success also presents us with a new challenge. Young Max has proven that humanity has something valuable to offer the galactic community. The question now becomes, how do we proceed with this knowledge? Max looked up at the massive dragon, suddenly aware that his simple act of helping with a coffee had cascaded into something far larger than himself. Your Majesty, if I may suggest something. The Emperor nodded, encouraging him to continue. On Earth, when we want to learn from each other, we start small. Maybe instead of thinking about grand diplomatic initiatives, we could begin with something simple, like a cultural exchange program, but focused on the things that connect us: food, science, art, the things that make us curious about each other. Vorax's scales shifted through several colors before settling on a deep, thoughtful blue. Once again, you demonstrate wisdom beyond your years, Max Chen. But I wonder, are you prepared for what such an exchange might entail? Before Max could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The holographic displays flickered, and several of the diplomats began emitting distress signals in various forms of energy. It appears, the Emperor said grimly, that not everyone shares our enthusiasm for human innovation. Max, I believe your next lesson in galactic diplomacy is about to begin. The ship's alarms pulsed in a rhythm that made Max's teeth vibrate. Through the chamber's massive viewing windows, he watched as a fleet of ships emerged from what appeared to be tiers in the fabric of space itself. Their designs were organic, almost predatory, with surfaces that absorbed light rather than reflected it. The Void Consortium, Emperor Vorax growled, his scales darkening to the color of deep space. They believe that any species capable of advancing beyond their current technological level poses a threat to their economic dominance. Max's mind raced through the implications. They're here because of me. Because I showed that humans can understand advanced chemistry. Precisely. The Emperor's tail lashed, creating ripples in the living metal walls. They'd been suppressing emerging civilizations for millennia, keeping them dependent on consortium technology. Your demonstration proves Earth could advance too quickly under galactic influence. The diplomatic chamber had transformed into a war room. Holographic displays showed the enemy fleet's positions, while various officials barked orders in languages that made Max's ears hurt. The consortium ships had formed a blockade, cutting off all conventional escape routes. Your Majesty, one of the crystalline beings chimed urgently. They're demanding we surrender the human for protective custody, or they'll open fire. Max clutched his backpack tighter, feeling the familiar weight of his textbooks and tools. There has to be a solution. In chemistry, when we're faced with an impossible reaction, we don't change the goal, we change our approach. Vorax's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Explain. Well, like in my grandmother's kitchen. Sometimes when a recipe seems impossible, the answer isn't to get fancier ingredients. It's to understand the basic principles better. Max pulled out his notebook, flipping through pages of chemical equations and cooking notes. What if we could use simpler technology in a way they don't expect? The Emperor studied Max for a long moment, then turned to the assembled officials. Clear the chamber. I wish to speak with young Max alone. Once they had complied, Vorax lowered his massive head to Max's level. You believe you can outmaneuver the most technologically advanced hostile force in the galaxy using primitive methods. Max pushed his glasses up, determination replacing fear. Your Majesty, humans have been doing the impossible with primitive methods since we first looked up at the stars. We just need three things: the right tools, the right knowledge, and Vorax prompted, and someone crazy enough to try. Max grinned, an expression that would have made his science teacher very nervous. I have an idea, but I'll need access to your ship's kitchen, engineering bay, and do you have anything like a high school chemistry lab? What followed was perhaps the strangest hour in the history of galactic warfare. Max moved between stations with the focused energy of a student facing a deadline, combining ordinary Earth science with advanced alien technology in ways that made the ship's engineers either gasp in horror or marvel in admiration. Using principles from his chemistry textbook, Max created a series of reactions that, when scaled up through the ship's systems, generated electromagnetic pulses that matched the exact frequency of the consortium ship's sensor arrays. From the kitchen, he requisitioned ingredients that, when properly energized, produced clouds of particles that behaved like a massive smoke screen, Except this smoke could be programmed to display false sensor readings. It's like a magic trick, Max explained as he made final adjustments to his improvised defense system. My dad's a stage magician. He always says the best illusions use the audience's expectations against them. The consortium expects high-tech solutions, so they're looking for high-tech threats. They're not prepared for someone using basic chemistry and physics in creative ways. Emperor Vorax watched with increasing amazement as Max's seemingly primitive solutions came together into an elegant defense strategy. You're not just hiding from them, the dragon realized. You're creating a puzzle they can't solve, because they're too advanced to consider simple answers. Exactly. It's like when my grandmother makes secret family recipes. Everyone tries to figure them out using fancy molecular gastronomy, but the real secret is usually just perfect timing with basic ingredients. Max checked his calculations one final time. We're ready. Should we show them what Earth science can do? The Emperor's toothy grin was all the answer needed. At Max's signal, his jury-rigged systems activated. The space around the ship erupted into a dazzling display of false sensor readings, phantom energy signatures, and carefully calculated chemical reactions that played havoc with the consortium's advanced targeting systems. The enemy fleet, faced with sensor data that contradicted everything they understood about physics, fell into chaos. Their formation broke as ships tried to chase down readings that seemed to indicate the presence of thousands of vessels, each one appearing to violate several laws of physics in uniquely impossible ways. Impossible, one of the returning officials whispered, watching the consortium fleet scatter in confusion. They have technology centuries beyond anything Earth has produced. How? Because, Max said, unable to keep the pride from his voice. Sometimes the best solution isn't the most advanced one. Sometimes you just need to understand the basic principles well enough to use them in unexpected ways. Emperor Vorax turned to address his stunned council. What we have witnessed here is more valuable than any technological advancement. The human child has demonstrated something we had forgotten in our race for progress. True innovation comes not from complexity, but from understanding fundamentals deeply enough to see possibilities others miss. The chamber erupted in discussion, with officials debating the implications of what they'd just witnessed. But Max's attention was drawn to a new alert flashing on one of the displays. Your Majesty, he said, pointing to the readout. I think we have another problem. Those energy readings, if I'm interpreting them correctly, the consortium ship's confusion is having an unexpected effect on local spacetime. The Emperor's eyes widened as he studied the display. It seems, young Max, that solving one problem has led us to an even more interesting challenge. Are you prepared to continue your lesson in galactic problem solving? Max adjusted his glasses and pulled out his notebook, ready for whatever came next. As my dad always says before a particularly dangerous magic trick, the show must go on. The space around Emperor Vorax's ship had become a kaleidoscope of temporal distortions. Max watched through the chamber windows as reality itself seemed to fold and unfold like origami made of starlight. His simple trick had worked too well. The consortium ship's advanced systems had overreacted to his deceptions, creating feedback loops in their reality manipulation drives. Fascinating, Max muttered, scribbling equations in his notebook. Their confusion is causing their ships to exist in multiple quantum states simultaneously. It's like Schrödinger's cat, but with entire spacecraft. Young human, a hovering ambassador composed of pure energy interrupted. Your Earth physics analogies, while charming, do not address the immediate crisis. The temporal distortions are drawing the attention of the Galactic Council. As if on cue, multiple holograms materialized in the chamber. Representatives from dozens of civilizations appeared, their forms ranging from vaguely humanoid to completely abstract concepts given temporary shape. Max recognized some of their species from his earlier encounters in the transit hub, but others seemed to exist in dimensions he could barely perceive. Emperor Vorax straightened to his full height, his scales rippling with formal patterns. Esteemed council members, I can explain. There is nothing to explain, Vorax interrupted a being that seemed to be made of living mathematics. We have observed everything. The human child's solution to the consortium threat was unprecedented, recklessly innovative, added another counselor, this one appearing as a symphony of colored light. Brilliantly primitive, contributed a third, whose form kept shifting between different evolutionary stages of various species. Max stepped forward, clutching his notebook like a shield. With respect, council members, I think you're missing the point. This isn't about primitive versus advanced technology. It's about understanding the basics so well that you can see possibilities others miss. The council chamber fell silent. Even the being made of mathematics seemed to be recalculating its assumptions. Consider this, Max continued, warming to his subject like he was giving a science presentation. Every advanced technology is built on simple principles. The consortium's ships are incredibly sophisticated, but they still have to obey basic laws of physics. By understanding those laws well enough, even a primitive civilization can find creative solutions. He flipped open his notebook, showing his calculations. Look at what happened here. We didn't beat their technology. We used their own assumptions against them. They were so focused on advanced solutions that they forgot to check for simple ones. It's like when my dad performs magic tricks. The audience looks for complicated explanations because they can't believe the real answer could be simple. The living mathematics being rippled in what might have been amusement. The human speaks truth. Our civilizations have become so enamored with complexity that we often overlook elegant simplicity. But the temporal distortions remain a threat. The Light Symphony counselor pointed out, the fabric of space-time in this sector is becoming increasingly unstable. Max studied the swirling chaos outside. Actually, maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. What if we could use this situation to create something positive? Emperor Vorax's eyes gleamed with interest. Explain your thinking, young Max. Well, these distortions are happening because different levels of technology are interacting in ways nobody expected, right? What if, instead of trying to stop it, we guide it? Create a controlled space where different civilizations can safely experiment with combining their knowledge. Max grabbed his backpack and pulled out his chemistry textbook, opening it to a chapter on catalytic reactions. Look, in chemistry, sometimes the most interesting discoveries happen when different elements interact in unexpected ways. But we do these experiments in controlled environments, labs with safety protocols and containment systems. The council members began to murmur among themselves as they grasped his suggestion. You propose, the mathematics being calculated, a designated sector of space where civilizations at different technological levels could safely interact and innovate. A neutral zone for cultural and scientific exchange. Emperor Vorax rumbled approvingly, where advanced and emerging civilizations could learn from each other without the risk of technological contamination or exploitation. Exactly. Max's eyes lit up. The consortium tried to prevent Earth from advancing by keeping us isolated. But what if the real path forward isn't about advancing or staying primitive? What if it's about learning to combine different levels of knowledge in new ways? The council chamber erupted in discussion. Holographic displays showed simulations of Max's proposal, with the current temporal distortions being transformed into controlled boundaries for this new neutral zone. We would need unprecedented cooperation between civilizations, the Light Symphony counselor mused, and a framework for ensuring mutual benefit, added another council member. And someone to oversee this initiative, the mathematics being concluded, all its equations focusing on Max. Someone who understands both primitive and advanced principles. Someone who has already demonstrated the ability to bridge these gaps. Max blinked as he realized what they were suggesting. Wait, you mean me? But I'm just a kid who likes chemistry and knows some magic tricks. Emperor Vorax lowered his massive head to Max's level. You are a human who has shown wisdom beyond your years, creativity beyond our expectations, and a unique ability to see connections others miss. Though, he added with a rumbling chuckle, Perhaps we should wait until you finish your Earth education before offering you a formal position." "Speaking of which," Max said, suddenly remembering, "I still haven't taken my chemistry test." "My dear boy," the Emperor replied, gesturing to the chaos of temporal distortions outside, "I believe you've just passed a far more impressive examination." As the council members began drafting protocols for this new initiative, Max watched the swirling patterns of distorted spacetime. Somewhere out there, the Consortium fleet was probably still trying to make sense of his simple deceptions. And somewhere even further, on a planet they had dismissed as primitive, his chemistry teacher was probably wondering why he had missed his test. "Your Majesty," Max said thoughtfully, "I have one condition for helping with this project." "Oh," the Emperor's scales shifted curiously. "Whatever we create here, whatever amazing combinations of science and technology we discover, we have to make sure everyone can understand it. No hiding behind complexity. No looking down on primitive solutions. Real innovation should bring people together, not drive them apart." The dragon's eyes glowed with approval. "A wise condition, young Max, though I suspect implementing it may prove to be our greatest challenge yet." Max grinned, already sketching new ideas in his notebook. "That's okay. My grandmother always says the best recipes are the ones that take time to perfect." 1 month later, Max stood in his grandmother's kitchen, carefully measuring ingredients for what might be the most important recipe in human history. The kitchen window offered a view that still took his breath away. The shimmering dome of Earth's first interactive science exchange center, or ISEC, rising from what used to be an empty field behind their house. "A pinch of salt," his grandmother said in Mandarin, watching him work with knowing eyes. She hadn't even blinked when a dragon emperor and various alien dignitaries had appeared in her garden 4 weeks ago. Instead, she'd invited them in for tea and somehow ended up giving the Galactic Council cooking lessons. "Not just any salt," Max replied, holding up a crystal that gleamed with more than earthly light. "This is from the mineral farms of Proxima Centauri. When it combines with Earth ingredients." He sprinkled it into the mixture, which briefly glowed with impossible colors before settling into a perfect golden brown. The kitchen door chimed, announcing visitors in 15 different languages. Emperor Vorax had to duck significantly to enter, his scales automatically adjusting their light absorption to match the kitchen's warm lighting. "Young Max," the dragon rumbled affectionately, "the first official exchange session is about to begin. Are you prepared?" Max adjusted his glasses, which now featured subtle technological enhancements courtesy of the Council's engineering team. "Almost. Just finishing the welcome refreshments. I thought we should start with something that represents what this whole project is about." "Ah, yes." Vorax's eyes gleamed with understanding. "Your theory about food being the universal catalyst for cooperation. It's not just my theory anymore." Max gestured to his notebook, now filled with successful experiments combining Earth science with alien technology. "Every test group has shown the same results. When you share food, you share culture. When you share culture, you begin to understand each other. And when you understand each other, innovation becomes inevitable," completed a new voice. The mathematics being from the Council materialized in the kitchen, its equations expressing what might have been excitement. "The preliminary results from the Exchange Center are exceeding all projected outcomes." Max grinned as he transferred his creations to a serving platform that hovered on controlled gravity fields. "That's because we stopped trying to separate primitive and advanced technology. Look at this kitchen. Earth gas stoves next to quantum stabilizers, traditional woks beside temporal containment fields, everything working together." His grandmother nodded approvingly as she added her own dishes to the platform. "Gu lao ji, hu yu xin ji, shi de ji he," she said, the combination of ancient wisdom and new knowledge. The procession that made its way to the exchange center was quite a sight. A human boy and his grandmother, a dragon emperor, a being made of living mathematics, and an array of floating dishes that bridged the gap between Earth cuisine and galactic gastronomy. They passed through security fields that Max had helped design, combining simple Earth principles with advanced alien technology to create safeguards that were both effective and comprehensible to all species. Inside, the main chamber was filled with an impossible mix of beings. Earth scientists worked alongside alien researchers, their different approaches to problems creating solutions neither side could have developed alone. In one corner, a group of high school students was teaching quantum physics concepts to an ancient energy being using basketball analogies. In another, alien engineers were learning about Earth's primitive recycling methods and discovering principles their advanced technology had overlooked. "You see," Max said, setting up the refreshments, "the consortium was wrong about everything. They thought keeping civilizations separate would maintain their power. But real power comes from sharing knowledge, from combining different ways of thinking." Emperor Vorax surveyed the scene with pride. "Indeed. Though I must admit, when you first added salt to my coffee, I never imagined it would lead to this. Sometimes the smallest actions have the biggest consequences," Max replied, repeating one of his father's favorite sayings about magic tricks. Speaking of which, he pulled out his latest notebook, filled with new ideas. "I've been thinking about expanding the program. What if we created a student exchange program, not just between planets, but between different levels of technological development?" The mathematics being's equations became more complex with interest. "Elaborate." "Well, look how much Earth has gained from this exchange. But we're not the only primitive civilization out there. What if we could help other emerging worlds the same way? Create a network of exchange centers, each one teaching civilizations how to combine their traditional knowledge with new ideas." Before the council members could respond, an alert sounded. The chamber's main display showed a familiar sight: consortium ships approaching Earth's solar system. But Max didn't panic. Instead, he smiled and adjusted his glasses. "Right on schedule. Grandmother, I think we're going to need another batch of those special dumplings you made last week. The ones that helped negotiate peace with the Andromeda Alliance," she asked, already reaching for her apron. "Exactly. Because I think it's time we showed the consortium that the most powerful force in the universe isn't advanced technology." Max picked up a plate of his latest creation, cookies that somehow existed in 3 dimensions simultaneously while tasting like childhood memories. "It's the ability to bring people together and share what we know." As the chamber prepared for their unexpected guests, Max caught his reflection in one of the polished walls. He saw not just a 13-year-old science enthusiast, but someone who had helped bridge the gap between worlds. His chemistry test still sat unfinished in his backpack, but somehow he thought his teacher would understand. After all, he had learned more about the fundamental principles of the universe in the past month than any textbook could teach. "You know," he said to no one in particular as the consortium ships entered orbit, "my dad always says that the best magic tricks are the ones where everyone wins. The audience gets amazed, the magician gets to create wonder, and the world becomes a little more magical for everyone." Emperor Vorax's scales shifted to a warm, amused gold. "And what kind of trick do you have planned for our visitors, young Max?" Max's eyes twinkled behind his glasses as he arranged the cookies on a quantum-stabilized plate. "The greatest one of all, Your Majesty. We're going to make their assumptions about primitive civilizations disappear and replace them with something much more interesting." As if in response, the cookies began to glow with possibilities, their aroma carrying the promise of new understandings, new connections, and new ways of seeing the universe. Above them, the consortium ships hung in orbit, about to learn that sometimes the most advanced civilization isn't the one with the most impressive technology. It's the one that knows how to bring people together. One cup of coffee, one cookie, and one simple solution at a time.